We have a tremendous opportunity in front of us. And by sharing this knowledge, we're collectively going to do something better. We're going to ensure that we're using data science and data in general for good.
When you think of secretive three-letter agencies, you might think of the CIA, FBI, or NSA. But there is one three-letter agency you rely on almost a daily basis. That's the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. The NGA's motto is Know the Earth, Show the Way, Understand the World. The NGA's mission is a huge challenge. They're tasked with collecting, analyzing, and distributing geospatial intelligence in support of national security. The agency's story and evolution are fascinating. Back in World War I, aerial photography began to play an ever-increasing role. Multiple photographs of targets were taken from different angles. They would be combined, paving the way for better intelligence and mapmaking. In World War II, technology improved, and so did the groups designated with the task of mapmaking. In the years that followed, many DoD branches would create their own mapmaking and intelligence gathering agencies. This pushed the limits of technology and expanded the pool of people working to solve this huge problem. Finally, in 1996, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency was created, and in 2004, its name was changed to become the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. This consolidation led the NGA to its current mission. Over the years, the NGA has engaged in many different pursuits, some of which include mapping and locating the compound where Osama bin Laden was ultimately found and killed, making an investment into the software that would become Google Earth, partnering with Google to use reduced image resolution spy satellite footage for Google Earth, and helping provide intelligence in a number of natural disasters, open source software, and much more. But perhaps the most interesting part of the NGA is it offers the foundation of so many of the mapping tools and navigation devices that you use on your phone on a daily basis. That's just a 30,000-foot view of the NGA. In today's episode, I sit down to interview Dr. Andy Brooks, the chief data scientist of the NGA. Dr. Brooks' career spans both the private and public sectors. And prior to his role at the NGA, he was an instructor at the School of Information at UC Berkeley. In today's episode, you'll get to learn more about Dr. Brooks, the NGA, and the role of data in the mission to build accurate, real-time maps of the world. Let's jump into today's episode of Hidden in Plain Sight with Dr. Andy Brooks.
This season of Hidden in Plain Sight is brought to you exclusively by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. Splunk helps organizations worldwide turn data into doing. It's time for data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen. Learn more at Splunk.com or by clicking the link in our show notes.
Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. And I guess I should say Dr. Brooks, because we're talking about some complex topics today. And I'm really excited to get your take and your ideas on an industry and an organization that people aren't very familiar with. So if we were at a cocktail party or at a bookstore and had just met and we're talking about, who you are, what you're up to, how do you introduce yourself?
The way I'd introduce myself is I'm a chief data scientist. And what it is that is I try to figure out how to create maximum value out of data, and that's the type of work that I've done for years. And it's one for at NGA. What that is what we use is geospatial data. So imagery, photos, radar, things like that about the world, and try to figure out what is that data? How do we create value out of that to inform decision makers?
And so when people hear about the NGA, what are some common misconceptions and how do you give the high level overview of what the NGA is and what do you do?
Great question. Traditionally, people think of us as NGA is we're the map people. We provide maps. And yeah, that's our heritage. We go back as an organization, not just NGA, but for the federal government, and particularly the military, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community, is providing maps. So maps of the world. And the way that I look at that now is what do we provide is geospatial intelligence. Part of that is a map. It's a two-dimensional map, let's say, a traditional one, like a topographic map that you might use to navigate a space. Much more, it's a keen understanding of what is going on in the world from a geospatial standpoint. And what do I mean by that? Is almost anything with a longitude, a latitude, and a timestamp. a place in Earth. You could show me a picture of a place. You could show me what's going on, the flows of people in that space, the flow of objects, things like that. That's what I see geospatial intelligence as. We're more than just simply just the providers of the map. It's that flat 2D thing, but it's much more of what's the new version of the map in the world. That could be a visualization of data, that could be a recommendation, things like that. It's really what we provide, is moving from that map to what is that new form of physical object or information or intelligence that we need to provide to our users.
That is an incredible mission and scope, because we've come a long way from maps that were rudimentarily created, and the NGA now is moving to a place where you're trying to add context and more and more information. So could you tell us a little bit about how the organization got started, what they were doing when they got started, to where you're at now?
Sure. Where we got started is, some of the names here is predecessor to us is NEMA, and there's some other ones. And kind of what's the way I look at it more holistically, or kind of like broader range of what it was, is we started from that map, that cartography-based sort of situation. And then we got into probably more the 1950s and the 1960s with the advent of overhead satellite imagery of taking pictures of things. Our partner, the National Reconnaissance Office, would put satellites up into space. We would get those images, whether from satellites themselves, shipped off the Corona program, if you're familiar with that, where they would drop film and catch it by an airplane. And then we would get that hard stock film, literally large negatives, and analyze that. Or we would get it from U-2 planes, things like that. We would look at those images and help decision makers figure out what was going on in that image. So some of our predecessor organizations worked on such things as like the Cuban Missile Crisis. So here are some things in Cuba. What are they? We need to figure out what those sorts of things are. So that's our history from there. And then providing that over time and looking at how the ways that we can look down on the world and sideways at the world have changed and improved. So it's like new forms of technologies have come online, much higher resolution satellite imagery. We have that, as well as other forms of what we can call remote sensing. So I just like to straightforward call it like radar, things like that. How can you look at a thing and not get like a visual image of it, but say like a diagram or a depiction of that in some other way? So that's the type of work that we've done through time. And then most recently is looking here at the anniversary is how we've done as an agency. One of our key points that we've done is providing intelligence for the Neptune Spear operation to go out and capture and then ultimately kill Osama bin Laden not too long ago. Our agency had a key role in that, in providing that geospatial intelligence to figure out, if you know the story at Abbottabad, that compound. What was going on there? Who was there? What were the flows of things? How did things navigate around? And then providing that to the mission planners, who then ultimately went in on that mission itself. So we kind of started with that era of Cuban Missile Crisis. We did Neptune Spear support, and now we continue to do that type of support going forward, every time with new and varied and fascinating forms of geospatial data.
And this data is used for some of the things that you described. It's also used for things like planning security for the Olympic Games and other large-scale events like that, as well as readiness for disaster relief and things of that nature. So can you give us a little bit more of an overview of the mission of the organization? Because it is larger than most people know.
It is a lot larger than most people know. And yes, we are at charter a Department of Defense organization. So our primary customer, let's say, are decision makers, related to that. Really, the way that I look at it is we are here to provide and inform key decision makers. And that's, who are, I look at it from a user perspective. Who are some of those users? It's the President of the United States. It's Congress, it's warfighters, which is language that we use for generals, or language I use as well is door kickers. So people going out on operations, things like that. And then, as you noted, it's like humanitarian response, down to disaster response, to countering animal trafficking and human trafficking and things like that. So we have quite a very large portfolio of things in there. What's key for any of those folks is we've got tremendous access to geospatial data. We have a tremendous pool of amazing analysts who take that data, analyze it, and convert it into information that can inform a decision maker. And it could be that president, it could be Congress, it could be warfighters, it could be humanitarian. That full range spectrum of folks is who we meet.
Very cool. And if we were to back up a little bit to get to know you a little bit better, who were you and what were you up to? What was your motivation? when you were starting out at Stanford? Just take us back to the days as a younger man.
Sure, a younger man.
You're that old.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. So my story is how did I end up being the chief data scientist at NGA? And it's the short version of the long one, and I'll pick one kind of here in the middle. I've always been fascinated by like new forms of data and like what you can do with it and create things from it. And that goes back to, as a kid studying like baseball, what became sabermetrics and things like that. I worked in the tech industry during the first .com is when I started, much of that time as like a product manager in places where there was some new form of data. What are we going to do with this? Right? It's like, we got this. Can we create something of value out of it? Let's build a company and things like that. And while that work, I transferred and took a class at Stanford on human-computer interaction, which was one of the key foundational courses that really got me kicked into, hey, like you've done some industry work, go study this more. So that path went from Stanford to getting my master's at the University of California, Berkeley School of Information. Throughout that entire time was doing consulting work and working with Yahoo Research and others, very much trying to keep my hand in that practitioner world of going out and engaging with customers, users, learning about their work, and then building and designing and shipping something to the world. And that's what I studied too in my dissertation work when I got my doctorate at Cal, also at the University of California, Berkeley School of Information, was looking at how some of the first companies that created wearable devices, today, very common, Apple Watch, things like that. How did those companies figure out how to create and build those products? You had access to new forms of data. What did you do? How did you build that? Always have been fascinated by that type of work. Graduated and got my PhD there at Berkeley and was kind of looking around at where would I go to go do this type of work. No shortage of opportunities, right? Here in the Bay Area, all sorts of crazy stuff. And out of the blue, got a phone call from an unlisted phone number in Virginia. And it was the guy who brought me in and hired me, who had found me as like, hey, you have this interesting background. We need help creating value out of our data at NGA. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I took one national security class at Berkeley, so I'm familiar with you guys from Neptune Sphere and things like that, and had some great opportunities and conversations with them of being able to help them better understand what their future could be, about how to do this. We've talked about the legacy or the history of the organization, going from imagery, still image, going to satellite imagery and things like that. And they're like, can you come help us create what that would be? And I said, I can't find, where else would you find an opportunity to do something like that? That would be incredible, bring some of these skills and experiences and work with an incredibly talented, high caliber, insane, fun group of people to solve some really hard pressing problems. Like this national security kind of stuff. Like, how good are you? And I'm like, I want to prove how good I am. So go join NGA and go do that. And I've been here now about 2.5 years, and it's been a phenomenal experience of doing this. And it's just going in there and making incremental changes and movements to help steer the direction of the intelligence community, in particular our organization, into delivering, the way I look at it, is like awesome data-oriented products and services for our customers who turn out to be some really fascinating, interesting folks.
When you're interacting with individuals now, you're based on the West Coast, you're traveling to the East Coast, not as much anymore, but occasionally you're going out there. How are you building the coalitions and the cultures that you need inside the NGA? How are you thinking about building your teams? And really, how are you thinking about leading the data organization there?
That's a great question, because it's really hard. There was a small number of folks who are really from outside the intelligence community, outside Northern Virginia. So coming in is you're the tech guy. You're the guy who got a doctorate. You're the guy from San Francisco. You got all these sorts of things. And what I found is very much is going in and building close relationships with folks throughout the organization, whether it's, the straightforward ones of the leadership folks and understanding their situation, where they're coming from and their challenges, and helping them understand how data and data science more broadly can be used to help improve their efforts and their work. And then going and sitting side by side with, people inside our buildings. And the way I'll describe it is downrange, our users, someone who is there sitting and looking at satellite imagery, trying to figure out what's going on and saying like, hey, you know what? I'm chief data scientist. This is what I'm in. Let's talk to me about what you're doing. What kind of problem are you working on? What are the role of things in helping you do that? And I'm trying to build real strong relationships with folks throughout the organization, because my key thing really is like, I got ideas. I got some ideas about how we can do things and how potentially we can improve things. I'm not an analyst. So I need to work with an analyst to help understand their situation, the challenges they see, and help empower them with data, with technology, with skills, things like that, to be the ever more awesome, great analyst that they potentially can be, like in that space. So it's one of those of going out and building those relationships and then seeing what those needs are for those folks, and then going out and delivering those needs for them, which could be as simple and straightforward as helping them get access to Python, on their desktop or something like that to do some scripting,
Right.
or learning some new classes, or with like a senior leader is helping them to take them through, like some of my courses I taught like at Berkeley is like, well, how do you make decisions when you have so much data that you can use? Like, how do you do that? So it's going out and building relationships with folks, hearing what those needs are, and then myself and a team delivering and fulfilling those needs to them.
So NGA has pioneered in many regards. And one of the ways that you pioneered, you were the first intelligence agency to open source software on GitHub, and you have a number of private partnerships with companies. How do you go about building those data partnerships or those coalitions?
Excellent question. I really like to try and take on this standpoint. It's like, we can't do this alone. Whether it's what is that? Delivering world-class geospatial intelligence to decision makers. We can't do that alone. It's moving so quickly. And what we need to look at for ourselves is understand, where are the gaps? Like, where are we missing, whether it's technology or data or analysis, things like that, and being like, okay, here's what our needs are, and then communicating those to the broader public. We have an effort under right now with our tech focus areas, which are related to that, where we communicate those to folks outside of the IC, in the intelligence community, is sharing those with those folks, and then fielding those inquiries to see how almost anyone can help do these sorts of things. And yes, there's traditional players like we'll go to, the large contract organizations. Increasingly, there's academic institutions who are doing fascinating work, as well as, you mentioned, more of the open source community, and I'll just call it others. There's a tremendous resource of other folks who are out there who can help us get smarter at the work that we're doing. And yes, of course, folks will say that raises some risks and concerns and things like that. Yeah, it does. We need to open ourselves up and share some of our experiences and some of our things that we need help with others. And we can do that as forging trust with them, take their inputs, provide some value back and forth, integrate their insights and expertise into the works that we do, so that we can all collectively get better and smarter about creating value out of this data that we have.
When it comes to creating value out of the data you have, are there any widely available tools that you rely that are not top secret or anything? What type of private tools do you rely on a day-to-day basis to do your job?
Private tools internally is one. We have a number of internal tools that we've built for our analysts, which are very much classified in the tools and how they work and what they can do. What I can speak more broadly at what they do is one of taking ones and zeros, or imagery data, and sifting through that and helping our analysts understand, hey, here's an abnormal situation. Here's something that's a little bit different. Particularly with like ones and zeros type data, is how do we take that and visualize that to our decision makers? So much of the tools that you'll see like out in public for doing that type of work, we can bring in and put them on what we call the high side network of things that we have. So they're not classified, the tools that they are, but how we use them can be classified, or the questions that we might be asking. But one that you can look to, we do like for industry or others and engaging in this space, is like, who else is trying to make sense of many volumes of imagery type data or video data and things like that, and learning from those folks. And what we're working to try and do as well is share some of our practices with those folks as well.
I love it. And one of the investments that NGA helped make was into Keyhole Incorporated, and that software eventually became Google Earth. Is there any, can you provide a comment on that? I think that's so cool that NGA is helping get some of these ventures started and allowing the technology that's created to become a part of private companies that we use on a day-to-day basis. So any insights into that?
Sure. The Keyhole project is one that I just look at such a Herculean big effort, and one where it's like created entire new industries, use cases, possibilities of doing that. And what I look at is like, okay, where are we now with NGA? How can we help with that? And one of the efforts I'm really fascinated by, and we have a core group of folks at the agency working on this, is helping make sense of all the different forms of geospatial data that is out there. So many different commercial providers providing overhead imagery, overhead video, remote sensing, and things like that. It's wonderful. It's a tremendous opportunity. It's an incredible library or a trove that we can go to. Challenge is finding stuff. And how do we know what this provider has? How does it compare to that one? So one of the great efforts underway right now is called STAC. It's the Spatio-Temporal Asset Catalog that's put forth by, I believe it's the Open Geospatial Consortium. And it's an industry group that's bringing together key stakeholders to help them understand and communicate and share with one another. How do you catalog your data? Like what you've got. One organization catalogs it one way, another catalogs it a different way. How do we come together with an agreement, a better practice, a standard, ideally, such that we can share and communicate and exchange with one another? For me, I love that because that's one where it's like that helps us as an agency. If I've got a provider here, how can I compare those sorts of things? We can signal and communicate what we have to industry and what we have, what is possible with that. What I love with it is by bringing all those different forms of data together from different sources and things like that, you can ask all sorts of fascinating, interesting questions. New businesses can be created out of that. New value can be created out of that. So it's one I really look for as tremendous opportunity for NGA, and not just NGA, but it's just like new amazing products and services that'll improve our everyday life is STAC. That's one, and it comes out of that history of seeding and providing feed to the keyhole effort. The new one is you could look at is STAC, which is going to create potentially tremendous new opportunities and exciting things for us. And I don't just mean NGA. It's just like anybody who's interested in using data about the world, you're going to now have a better library and catalog of what's out there and what can be done with it. I think it's tremendous.
Very exciting times, to say the least. At NGA, when you are working with colleagues and you are collaborating, can you give us any insights into like a normal day? I know there's not very many normal days, but if you have any examples you can share, I think it would be really cool to see a behind the scenes look at how things get done and maybe an example of a project you've worked on that is not classified.
Sure. Unclassified work is, how do I spend my day is really one of, I have engagements, with key leaders in the agency, our key executives who anywhere from the director to the deputy director and the high folks making decisions. I have engagements, conversations with them, real one-on-ones and things to be like, what are the challenges you face? What are the opportunities? Again, is sharing some ideas about here's what data science means in your space. Here's how you can use it. Here's what machine learning or NLP or AI or any of those things, what they really mean, brass tacks for the work that folks are trying to do. So having those key types of engagements, I'll often have like a non-NGA or non-IC type of engagement or interaction. So what is that? It's having conversations like this with you today. It is one of engaging with colleagues in industry and academia and sharing our experiences and stories and gathering those better and best practices from them and bringing them back. And then I love to dovetail in with a conversation during my day is hanging out and chatting with one of our users, so to speak. So literally is going out there and having a phone call, or if I'm out in DC, is having a side-by-side with somebody and being like, all right, you're an analyst and you're working on, let's say, this challenge that we have, say, in East Africa. Take me through your work. Show me how it works. So show me some of your things of what's going on there. So I get a better ground level understanding of what it's like to be one of our folks. And that's really how I love to spend my time, is navigating between that high level strategic type view to all the way down to the ground day to day of what it means to be an analyst, to be a customer of our products and services. Then integrating those two things together to really come forward with, hey, here are our strategies and best practices in the work that we're doing to provide intelligence.
When it comes to your learning routine about data and data science and the future of AI or machine learning, whatever you want to call that, how do you go about deciding who you're going to read? Are you focused on professors and researchers? Are you reading, the latest books on the topics, podcasts? How are you going about learning?
All of the above. The academic in me is very much give me as many of the sources as I possibly can. And bring those sorts of things together. It's very much is coming out of my experience at Berkeley, is in that academic community, those folks who are posing real challenging, hard questions, real specifically, the ethical implications of using artificial intelligence. What does that look like? And so engaging with that research community and reading their materials and bringing that back into our folks to say like, hey, if we use AI in this sort of way and being very specific, in a high side or a classified sense, what are the implications of that? How does that change things? How do we need to wrestle with that? So bringing those things in that space. I also look to very much is that world of folks who are out there in the world, coming up with new ideas in AI, machine learning, fill in any of those words, and then building and creating and delivering products and services to the world. So those folks who are sharing their stories of what it's like to create a product, say at Google or Amazon, or not even just a big name brand one, any sort of organization. What is that real story of how they're doing that? And those are fascinating because you find those on Twitter, you find them on Instagram, you find them in blogs, like all over the place, these little great stories of learnings, that you can take and bring back. So there's no real shortage, of any of these things. It doesn't get to be a challenge of like managing all the different sorts of sources. And I do have contacts like at Berkeley and back in industry and such, where I go to them and being like, hey, Steve, what's your point focus on? Who's your resource on this topic? And then bringing those sorts of folks in and then providing my insight back to them as well. So it's tremendous the amount of work that's going on in this space. I really laud and thank the folks who are speaking publicly about it, whether privately in their own efforts or in their organizations and sharing those things, because we're all going to get smarter about using this. We have a tremendous opportunity in front of us. And by sharing this knowledge, we're collectively going to do something better. Even you would say, dare say, more good, for the world. That sounds very grandiose and big like that, but it's like sharing this knowledge. We're going to ensure that we're using data science and data in general for good. Like we're going to do good things with it and not recreate some of the challenges or misfortunes of the past.
What conversations do you want to see more of in regards to ethics? Or is there an example of an ethical discussion or debate right now that you think more people need to be aware about in the community?
I think the community writ large, I would say, is the intelligence community has had conversations and continues to have real conversations about the role of, say, artificial intelligence in targeting. So identifying, hey, here is what we think is a target, what should happen next. And we're very clear on like, there is a machine or the machine there's a person, like the person runs that at the end of the day. And, what happens next with that and sharing that. That's been one that I've been really interested in, is sharing that with others. What is the role of the human in that? And we've crafted that out really well. It adheres to all of our legal compliance for what we call our tradecraft and how we do that type of work. One that I would like to see more in industry is looking kind of more at like, if this is the right term, is like the second and third order effects of using, let's just call it artificial intelligence. So we use it in this one way, it creates value, let's say in this space. How does it reallocate or change things for someone else that we didn't think about? Or that we didn't anticipate? Who are those stakeholders who may not have been at the primary table or at the conversation when we were creating this? And now that we've launched it and released it, oh no, like it's hurting somebody over here. I'm really fascinated is how do we, those who are creating products and services out of data, how do we better identify who those other stakeholders are? How do we ensure that we bring those folks, individuals, into these conversations early on to say, hey, you know what? Here's how this could impact me. And we go, okay, we need to account for that earlier. Less cleanup, things like that. That's what I'm really fascinated by is how we as a community of practitioners in this space better identify who are those other stakeholders that we don't see that may be impacted by this, and how do we bring them into the conversation to ensure that we get this more often than not better right, so to speak, the first time.
What type of practices or trainings or, basically best practices does NGA engage in that you wish private industry would learn from? Because often we think of, these large 3-letter agencies or just any type of government agency as slow and bureaucratic. But when you go behind the scenes, there's often innovation occurring, or there's some really cool things that private industry could learn from. What does private industry have to learn from NGA?
One I would say is, what can private industry learn is just the importance of teaching and training your folks to manage data. And the term that we use for that in our agency is data stewardship. which is not something I'd been familiar with before I came here. And it's a fascinating one. And it's one where I really look to industry, whether it's established organizations or new organizations who are collecting and analyzing forms of data, is having that stewardship mindset. And what do I mean by that? It's one of like understanding really, it's like where this data is coming from, what were the terms of how it was collected and from whom, what are the expectations of what can be done with it, how do we manage that data now that we have it as an asset to ourselves and to others, how do we tend it, how do we care for it, and how do we feed it literally down to that space, and how do you steward that data? And we can keep going into what that means, and it's really one of just like, how do you ensure that it continues to have value going forward and that we don't forget what's there? And I say that because it's very easy to say, hey, here's some new form of data. Let's go get that. Let's go use this, in new and fascinating ways. And there will always be new forms of data. We can create tremendous value out of the data that we already have by going in and stewarding that data to really understand what is it, how can it be used, engaging with customers and users to discover new ways to use existing things, and creating value out of that amazing asset or that trove of data of untapped value. That concept of data stewardship is one that I would love to see more organizations outside of the intelligence community really start to adopt. There's pockets of that, and it's more so it's like really building and boosting that in other places.
Especially when the search costs and the ability to get more and more data that's rapidly falling and diminishing, there's more data sets than ever before. So I think that stewardship idea is very, very timely because we want to value what we have, not just keep getting more and more of it at ever diminishing costs. What type of trends do you see in the data science world that are very promising for the future of the field? Any new things out there that you're seeing?
One that I really look at is there's ever increasing new forms of types of technology. So it's always going to faster compute, faster algorithms, things like that. What I'm most excited by is almost more in like an education side is really one where you have data scientists who are looking much more first at how customers and users are going to be working with the output of their work. And that's been a tremendous promise that I've seen. And why I say that is because, looking at this space, we had the rise of big data. We had data scientists, so we got folks who could crunch the data and kick out a result. In the consumer world, we use that, say, for like ad targeting and things like that. Sometimes with like negative repercussions, and just like how that impacted folks and different sort of examples we could go into. But now is what you really see is this tremendous move towards that keen understanding of users and customers from the very beginning. And that's what I look is really promising. Like the future of what can be done with data is so much bigger now. And really that one of when it comes to data science training and education, I'm much more fascinated in data scientists learning these like social science oriented skills and going and getting those and integrating into the work that they do, as well as our social scientists who are more trained in that, learning these data science technical skills and bringing those two things together. It's data science is not just the purview of the tech nerds. It is the merging of these spaces and figuring out what is the great blend. That's what really excites me in the training space.
When it comes to existential risks, whether it's pandemics or things like human trafficking, how does NGA and the work you all do help to combat these threats?
Sure. So it's like there's an innumerable number of threats, really facing national security for us. And it's one that we focus on as an agency and broader intelligence communities, what we call the 2+3. And it's, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and violent extremist organizations. We're sitting here now with the pandemic, right? And you're like, wow, okay, didn't anticipate that one. That's not on the 2+3. That's what's there. I think the key thing that we have is looking at for what these potential threats are is one of taking two different perspectives or two different lenses on it. One is having that broader one, like the 2+3 and things that could emerge, having that big one, and then those close relationships with our customers and users to understand what are those other things that might grow, that might tip up and become the next big threat that we have. So having those big ones that folks can, we can agree, 2+3 plus pandemics, things like that, and then building those close relationships with those folks, the other users that we have, to understand what are those things that could be coming over the horizon and help provide them with the intelligence they need to understand Is that a threat? Is that a risk to us and to others? And providing a means for them to communicate that to others in the community.
When it comes to defense, there's obviously so many different things that are classified that we don't see, we don't get to know what's behind the curtain. And that can create a real problem when it comes to communications and getting the word out about different projects and initiatives. Are there any examples of initiatives that NGA has been working on or participating in that have recently become unclassified that you can share with us?
The efforts or initiatives that we have that have become unclassified or that we talk about unclassified is the Open Geospatial Consortium. We work through them on our efforts of things that we have. There's the Spatio-Temporal Asset Catalog, the library index of the different forms of geospatial data that is out there. That's one where we are very public in the work that we do there, championing that support, showing how we're committed to it, how we're putting resources to it. That's the one that I would really say is the key thing that we're engaging with publicly in the unclassified space with geospatial intelligence.
Very cool. And Andy, when you are going about your quarterly planning or your yearly planning, do you set, big, hairy, audacious goals? How's the goal setting process look from your end inside an organization that is so dynamic with so many different things changing?
Great question. It's hard. Because it's one where it's like we have the key goals or directions sent by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. We have the national intelligence priorities that we need to align to. And what I look at is for my goals is one of how is it, goals of how I spend my day, how I spend my week, how the team does it. How is what we're doing help improve our ability to meet and achieve those goals, and it's one of, the goal of countering the 2+3 threat, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, violent extremist organizations. Is something that I'm doing today or this quarter going to help us improve that in a measurable way? So take a metric of what we're doing today, set a goal, and align ourselves to be able to deliver towards that. That's where I really work. It's one where I go, there's no shortage of opportunities for us in this space. Many different goals that we can have. We need to make sure that we align our efforts to those in leadership from OD&I and others, and ensuring that our goals map to fulfilling those, and making sure that we are communicating how our efforts inform those goals, and communicating to those folks, hey, here are some other goals that you should be aware of, things that we're working on that may not be in there that you may want to consider in future planning. So it's really one of concerting and focusing our efforts to ensure that they do, at the end of the day, fulfill those goals set forth for the DoD and the IC more broadly.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about the NGA, and how do you go about correcting those?
I think the biggest misconception is that we're the map folks or we're the image folks. We do that, and it's broader than that. We have so much more access to geospatial data and intelligence in the work that we do, and communicating that to folks more broadly and to the public. And one that I would say is beyond, the intelligence community or beyond the DoD is more the IC in general. And it's just like, how do intelligence community organizations such as ourselves, how do they do their work? And I think there can be some misplaced understanding in the community and in the public writ large about how we do our work and what it is. That we may do some things, we do things that aren't great and things like that. And it's a lot of those are misunderstood. I think some of that comes down to how we communicate what we do to folks. We so much can say it's like, oh, it's classified, we can't talk about it. And you go, well, there are some things we can't talk about. So let's share those examples with folks so that they have a more informed understanding of who we are and what we do, and communicate to them that, hey, we are wrestling internally with questions about, say, like in my world, is what are the ethics of using artificial intelligence? We discuss and debate those things back and all over, just like other folks. Communicating and sharing that with the public and the community writ large, I think will help. And then particularly in that space is in going to the public as stakeholders, as the members of the American public that we are providing security for. How do we bring them into this conversation so that we can be much more informed about our efforts and what we're doing?
when it comes to planning for the future, there are some things that just, don't change, that we're still going to be the same in like the next 5, the next 10 years. Maybe like the principles, right, of what NGA is doing and preparing for. What are some of the principles of the agency's work, and how are you getting ready for the future of, improving on those or fighting those challenges?
I think the biggest one, and this is, for our organization, or I would say is many large organizations who collect and analyze data and create information out of it, is the main principle. The real thing we focus on is our people, is really going out and understanding our people, whether that's our workforce, those individuals who are going and creating geospatial intelligence today, is training and equipping and empowering them to be able to use whatever many forms of data are coming online, new forms of technology, to address any sort of threat that could be coming down the path. I really think about in my work, and for us as an agency, is our big responsibility is going in and understanding our workforce and their needs today, building close relationships to figure out how their work will be evolving and changing over time to counter threats, and really is one of finding what they need and empowering them to be able to address any threat that comes over the horizon for us.
Andy, when you are taking a step back from your formal role in the professional world and you're unplugging, when you're taking some time off, what are you up to on a day-to-day basis to recharge, to recover? Are you a meditator? Are you out there cycling? How are you unplugging?
It's a hard one to unplug because I love doing this stuff. You want to do it all the time. So it's one where what I do to kind of just disconnect a little bit and to help, as I describe it, kind of connect the dots is trail running. I love to trail run. And it's one of being here in the Bay Area is having so much access to the outdoors, and going for a long trail run here in San Francisco Bay Area. When we get past this post, pandemic world, is going out and doing that. And that's my main recharge, breakaway, connect the dots, kind of think things through, is going out on a big, long, epic trail run, anywhere from 6 miles, 8 or 10, 12, 15 or something like that, is going out on a big, long journey like that, where the real only connection I have back to the world is I've got my my fitness watch, that's tracking my heart rate and my speed. So I'm learning about myself, and then I'm thinking about all the different things that are going on in the world, and just connecting in that sort of way out on a big, long, epic trail run.
I love that. And is there a question that you wish you get more often about the NGA, or is there something that I should have asked you? What's on the top of your mind there?
Excellent. That's always a great question, is one of how do you see NGA in 7 years? What does that look like?
Yeah, when it comes to that, what is it?
We are following on our path of really moving towards empowering our customers and our users. 7 years from now, what is the marked difference? Is we are delivering the most awesome, incredible technology solutions and services to our customers. And who is that? Our customer is the president reading the daily briefing. What we're providing them is incredibly valuable, all the way to an analyst who's at, a forward operating base somewhere, or to, a special operative, a special forces team member going out on a raid or something like that. You could engage with any of those folks and they go yeah, NGA, they deliver awesome killer stuff, whether it's a map or it's a decision or it's a visualization or something to help them make more informed decisions. That's where I see NGA. That's what gets me really excited, is 5-7 years from now, you'll be able to go to any of those users and they'll be like, yeah, man, they deliver cool, awesome stuff to us that help us protect the country.
Very cool. Very inspiring. Dr. Brooks, thank you for being generous with your time. This has been awesome. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
I'm Sophia Bush, and you've been listening to Hidden in Plain Sight from mission.org. This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. In today's data-driven world, every company, big or small, new or old, is sitting on terabytes of unused, untapped, and unknown data. Splunk helps turn all that data into action. Using cutting-edge AI and machine learning, Splunk delivers real-time predictive insights that will help you on your mission to change the world. With solutions for IT, security, Internet of Things, and business operations, Splunk empowers people to make faster, better decisions and take action to get things done. It's time for our data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen.